How you going, guys? We recently had a run at the all-historic Mallala in the Historic Sports Sedan Stanza. We ended up second for the weekend, but we struggled with a fueling problem, an issue with the mechanical injection setup. So I thought I'd have a quick run through that and just show you guys what actually happened and maybe try and understand the mechanical injection side of things. It's something that I'm still very much learning. I'm yet to get my head around it fully, but I'll at least show you guys what a setup looks like and sort of the basics behind it. And then also we'll jump on board for a couple of laps and just show you what it's like to drive inside at sort of 90%. Yeah, and while I'm standing here, I thought I'd just show you guys this. So we have now mocked up dummy block in the esky, Chev blocks in there, heads are on. Yeah, I mean, surely just fits. Let's be honest, it's pretty tight. Obviously no sump on there at the moment. You can see how far the heads hang out. So hopefully over the next week we'll be looking at just dummy fitting some headers on there and working out where exhausts go. And so yeah, let's get into it. Yep. This is one part of the mechanical fuel injection setup from the Stanza. It's a Lucas injection kit. Like I said, I'm still very much learning this whole system and how these work. They're actually pretty complicated in comparison to a modern injection system because obviously they don't have the electronics behind them doing all the smarts that we don't see in a conventional system. So they're having to do it mechanically, which is obviously the reason that we call it a mechanical injection. So this is driven off the crank. So with the Stanza, so there's a small lift pump that just helps prime the system. It's also a good little backup there if anything failed in the mechanical system, but at least the engine was still getting some fuel. So you basically got an inlet and an outlet. There's another metering system that runs off the cam. We won't bother getting into that because how they all sort of work together I'm not fully comfortable with just yet. But so this system here, so there's a rod that runs down the middle, these two outlets on the top and bottom. So they're just little banjo bolts that go to your inlet to injectors. Now when I say injectors, it's not like a modern one that can pulse and, you know, it's more like an old school, I guess like a carby, like it's more like a valve, right? So by the time the fuel's getting there, it's just going in. Whatever you've sent to the inlet, that's just what's going to happen. More so the modern one controls it at the inlet. So what happens here? So this little linkage here is connected to your throttle. So there's another nice little thing that can fail. That's just race cars, unfortunately. So this little linkage here connects to your throttle. Obviously it's got a little backstop on it. But if you can have a look down here, I'm going to see if you guys can actually see, hopefully we can see that. So in here, there's effectively, this is machined as a little cam, and the rod that runs through the middle, which is controlling how much comes out of the outlets and heads off to the inlet. When that system is pressurized, that rod's trying to push itself out. So depending on where your throttle is will depend on how far out it'll let it come. So basically when you're at no throttle, it's keeping that little rod closed, and then as you wind around to full throttle, it's letting that rod come further out. Right, so that's not a problem. So that's working fine, and that's the basic tune. That's a basic throttle position to fuel pressure or fuel load. But what's happened here, so this being a turbo and this rare little part back here, so this is effectively like a little, it's kind of set up like a wastegate. So this connects to the inlet and obviously receives boost. When it gets boost, it then pushes out this little arm, which has got little teeth on this brass connection here. There is a cam set up in here, so no matter the position of the throttle, when the boost hits, it actually pushes this whole unit outward and allows more fueling. Now, the problem that we had is these little teeth here have been gradually wearing down. And what we didn't notice, because it's very hard to see in the car, is that as these teeth were wearing down, this little unit was sort of skipping along these teeth, and the car was being, well, the engine was just getting richer and richer and richer all the time. So it didn't matter whether it was on idle or driving or whatever, because it was effectively thinking that it had boost. And then at Malar it got really bad, so I could hardly even drive it. It was just fouling up. And then by the time we got to quali, what had happened is this had stripped out enough, these teeth had stripped out enough that this whole cam here had just fallen off. So this system was effectively giving us full boost fuel constantly, which meant I couldn't even drive it. I couldn't keep the thing running. It would just miss and pop and fart and just no good. So as a quick fix, once we worked it out, as a quick fix, we flipped this over because the teeth on the other side weren't too bad. So obviously the alignment wasn't fantastic. And then we got it working. And for one session it ran pretty well, but I ran the GoPro in a weird spot in the car, and the window net got in the way, so it's really hard to see what's happening. And then the next session, which is what I'll show you guys a couple of laps of, it was running okay, but it was starting to get rich again and starting to smoke, and it was not feeling really nice on full throttle. So in the laps that I've done there, I'm just barely trying to load it on full throttle, and then what you actually see is on the second lap coming into turn 4, if you watch closely and listen, the far right gauge is the fuel pressure gauge, and you'll hear a miss coming into the kink at Malar, and you'll see the fuel pressure gauge have a flutter. At that point I started getting out of it. After the hairpin, I basically backed off to 3/4 throttle for another lap, cooled it down, tried to maintain some speed and work out what was actually happening. And so assume that this air is boost coming into the engine. So as it comes in, so you can see that rotating there. Not only is that rotating the whole arm, but like I said, if you watch this section here, which is what's effectively keeping that main pin down the middle in the right spot, as I add boost, so that cam in there is pushing it out. So yeah, you can see basically when this fails, this little section here, this cam hangs out constantly, full time, and it just gives the engine full juice. So that system, as I said, still runs a lift pump, but obviously this section here and the way that it's machined up, and the boost control and all that, and the way that that's tuned is very important to make sure that you're getting the right amount of fuel. Whereas a modern system, so I found some old bits in my garage, really cool thing here. So we've got a fuel pump on the end. The fuel pump basically goes straight into the fuel rail, and then on the back of the fuel rail we've got the pressure regulator. So fuel comes into the rail, the injectors are electronically controlled, and then anything that doesn't get used hits the fuel pressure regulator, which is what's creating our optimum pressure inside the rail. So we want to control that so that we know the pressure that's going to be coming out of each injector. And then what doesn't get pushed back into the rail basically returns to the tank this way. So all the smarts now happen in here. So because we've just mechanically set our fuel pressure inside the rail from our pump, these injectors then obviously go to the computer, the ECU, and they're told when to open and for how long and things like that, so their pulse and all that sort of stuff. So they've got a little solenoid in them and a little pin slide that opens up and down, and they atomise the fuel a lot nicer, like the spray pattern and all that sort of stuff. So this can be really smart because you can then tie it into the ECU, you know, having an optimum air-fuel ratio that's measured out of the exhaust, and then these can adjust what they're doing to make sure that it's maintaining that air-fuel ratio. You can tune on a million other ways, boost, throttle position, you know, you name it, because you're now controlling the injector here. Doesn't really matter what's happening, so long as the mechanical system's keeping the fuel flowing correctly and the pressure in the rail is what you expect it to be, which is why we have the fuel pressure regulator. Then you can do whatever you want with the fuel via the ECU. just quickly on that as well, we've done a bit of talking about dry sumps. So in this system, you guys might have heard of surge tanks. I'm sure all of you have. Some of you may have not. I thought I'd quickly explain that because a surge tank is a very, it's the same concept as a dry sump in that, let's say that's our fuel tank over here. We might have a lift pump, we would call it. So that's a pump that takes the fuel out of the main fuel tank. Now the problem is if we got surge here, so if the fuel tank was sloshing around or got really low or something like that, the pump may miss, for a second, and then when it's trying to pump to the fuel rail, we get fuel surge, right? And then that's a problem because we lean out. So instead what we do is we pump from the fuel tank over to a surge tank, which may be 2 litres or 4 litres or whatever it is. It will be baffled. It'll be, taller and skinny, just like a dry sump would be. Then we have another pump, which would be, so we're lifting into the surge tank, and then we've got our main pressure pump coming off the surge tank. So what happens is, because this is full and it's a lot harder to get surge through due to its size versus a large fuel tank, is that even if we surge over here, that we've still got a couple of litres to use there during G-forces or whatever has created the problem for the pump to maintain fuel pressure. So just like a dry sump system, so effectively the same. These days, surge tanks may be inside of the main tank, so that's how the Escort has it. We actually have a surge tank that's located inside and drops out the bottom. The other things that people may do is have effectively a larger version of this, a hydromat that sits along the bottom of a fuel tank that's baffled, and they're extremely good at picking up, so they can pick up last little drips all the way through the fuel tank. So that's how a surge tank would work, but they all end up in the same fuel rail and coming out the same injectors. So yeah, hopefully that's sort of a rough explanation anyway about that mechanical system and the problems that we had. But yeah, so let's jump on board, take a couple of laps, keep an eye on that last lap on the fuel pressure gauge and see if you can hear it. But yeah, she's a cool thing to drive, definitely fast if we could get it. When it was really nice, when we found the problem, fixed it briefly, it felt so much better on the throttle, and the thing was really quick. We were quickest on track, even when we were coming from the back of the field and overtaking cars. So yeah, she's still a good thing, and hopefully the guys can get it sorted and can get back out and do some cool laps. But yeah, have a look, enjoy, see ya.